Teresa was a 16th century mystic. She was a firehouse of a woman. Her father put her into a convent when she was about 16 years old to be educated, but he did not intend for her to stay there. He just intended that she wouldn't get into trouble. But she liked it, and that didn't set well with him. She was in a convent that was an educational convent. She left there and returned and entered a Carmelite convent when she was about 19 or 20. And this is the curious thing, and this is the curious thing about all of us and this force called God, which remains the ultimate mystery for all of us. What is God? What isn't God? What is this mysterious empty space that we pursue, that we cannot stop pursuing, that we wish we could stop pursuing, and yet we cannot stop pursuing? She enters a cloister, and for the next 19 years, she has an absolutely dry spiritual life, and yet she doesn't leave the convent. And it's absolutely dry. It's bone dry. There are no great mystical experiences. In fact, half the time, sometimes she's praying, sometimes she's not. She's not involved in any deep, profound spiritual anything. If anything, her life is more mentally spiritual than anything else. And then one day, she's walking down the hallway of her convent, and there's a statue there. A statue of the flogging of Jesus. Now, that's not something you want in your home necessarily, but however, what happens to her is called a conversion experience. And what that means is an experience that can happen to any one of us. And what that means is that the experience of what you hold in your mind is converted into its power. What you have in your mind as theory, what you have in your mind as an idea, what you have in your mind as a thought form about something about God, is suddenly, instantaneously, spontaneously converted into the power of it. Are you with me? So she looks at this statue of the flogging of Jesus, and in an instant, what consumes her is not the pain of this experience, but rather she was consumed by why this human being took on the journey of the Christological experience. That's what consumed her. That's what she got. What she got was the reason that this whole archetype of the suffering for sins was really about the taking on of an archetype of that a human being was able to come into the human experience and do this. That the time had come for human beings to have a higher order of choice. And that choice was one in which that it had to raise the bar on the consciousness of choice in relationship to how we dealt with each other. Up until now, then, the way we dealt with each other was based on an eye for an eye. And that was our sense of justice. So a human being descends and says, we have to change this. Because so long as there's an eye for an eye sense of justice, there'll always be hatred. There can only be hatred. Because an eye for an eye will always position you at the center of your universe. You will always think you're right if it's an eye for an eye. You can never have a God if it's an eye for an eye. Because there's no place in your scheme. If it's an eye for an eye sense of justice, there is no place in that schemata of thinking for a force of right greater than your own. So a human being comes down with this concept that says, I'm going to show you that there's a higher order of reasoning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to live through every excuse you give yourself to righteously attack another person, but I won't do it. I will be betrayed. I will be humiliated. I'll go through it all. But instead of hating back and doing and declaring all the things a human being can do to get even, I won't do it. And in the end, what I will do is show you how to respond. You respond by saying, I forgive the whole scene. And I will go into a garden and even be abandoned by God. I will say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I have no idea why you're asking me to do the most absurd, cruel, hideous thing in the world, and I don't want to do this. And you are not answering me, and I will hang on this cross and scream, where are you in the midst of the worst unfair thing in the world? I have been a good man. And still, you're not helping. And then he says, oh, I forgot the last bit of this. Forgive them. And then the soul, so full of power, says, I release myself. I'm off this planet. I'm out of here. She got that his journey was not about pain, but about love. She got the whole cosmic force of it. And she collapsed on the ground and finally realized that the journey of God, any cosmic, the journey of life was about love. Not personal love, but somehow her world for the rest of her life would be about love. And she collapsed on the floor. And when she woke up, when she got up, the beginning of Saint Teresa had been born. And after that, her experiences on the inner world were completely converted. She had carved a route had been carved in her, where her capacity to understand the nature of God had become illuminated. She could understand the nature of the sacred in a way that before she could read about it and sit there, I wonder what they meant. Now it was revealed. And that whole sense of revelation, which is a part of the mystical journey, is a part that can awaken in any one of you. In any one of you. But I'll tell you something about that. And it's something I'm going to emphasize now and continually through our time together. As I continually emphasize, no matter who studies with me, the significance of remaining someone in prayer and in a deep reflection, deep reflective life, is because revelation and the deepening of interior sight and understanding is something that genuinely begins to happen within you. You know, it's frequently people will say to me, I was born gifted, I'm a psychic, I tune that out. You have no idea how much go outside. Just go outside. Don't ever talk to me that way. But when I can see that someone, through that quietness of prayer, you can see that in them. You can feel that that field of grace around someone, and you know that extraordinary journey has begun. And you know that when they speak to you, that the revelation they're talking about is from that deep, genuine place, that in fact they are being spoken to. Some force of grace has a hand on their shoulder. So Teresa began to write, and when she wrote her interior castle, it was because her spiritual director finally said, you have to chart your inner waters. She sat down to write the interior castle, and she said to God, I don't know what you want me to say about the soul, and she had a vision that the soul was a castle, a crystal, rather, that had 7 mansions. Now that fascinated me, because after writing Anatomy of the Spirit, I thought, well, 7 mansions, 7 chakras, 7 levels, 7 sacraments, 7 levels to the tree of life, 7, 7, 7. So I want to talk to you about 7 mansions and the 7 chakras and the 7. It's so fascinating that she would say 7. And how would you compare the two? And this is the comparison. You're going to go into the mansions, and while I'll take you through all 7, anyone who says, I'm just rushing right through, is going to get the shock of your life. When you go into the mansions of your soul, you go in through a process of deep, deep self-examination. The first, second, and third mansions are where you keep your reptiles. This is what you're going to discover. The first mansion that we begin with tomorrow morning is the mansion of chaos, humility, and the seduction of God. Okay? And while I'll lecture on it far more extensively tomorrow, I just want you to imagine that you're going to go in search of why you create chaos as a distraction from God, which is probably not something you've ever really asked yourself, much less have you gone in and thought, how many ways do I create chaos? And if you think you can answer that in one sitting, you are so mistaken. One of the beautiful teachings that Teresa had with her sisters was to look for God in the details of your life. And that doesn't mean like go out there and find pretty little flowers and say, oh, cuckoo, look at this pretty little flower. No, 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 no. You look for God in the details, and one of the type of details is, why do you create chaos when you do? Why do you create distraction when you do? Why do you blank out when you do? I will ask a question of someone, and the more complicated the question, the shorter your answers. And that is always the case. When I ask a question, the more powerful the question, the shorter your answers will be. And you will get, if you could cut a 1-syllable word in 2, you would do it. I'll say, what do you think God is? If there was a way for you to cut the word love into a shorter sound, you would do that. And you don't even mean it, you're just saying that. You'll say whatever comes to your mind just as long as I stop looking at you. Because you have no idea, but you really don't want whatever this God is to hear you. But you definitely want me away from you. Because every superstitious hackle in you is on high alert. Because what you're terrified about is that there is some God paying attention to you. Because now what you do know is that if you do happen to, by accident or by force, say something significant, your life's going to change. And then you're really in trouble. So you won't answer in a full sentence. You got to get out of that answer as fast as you can, so you answer in one word. And that is absolutely deliberate. If not consciously deliberate, it is instinctually deliberate. If I asked you something completely meaningless, you'd go on forever. I wouldn't be able to shut you up. But ask you something that could shift your life compass. And you'll sit on your hands. And you'll answer in tiny little abrupt sound bites. Because there's something deep in your instinctive spiritual gut that knows this one is big trouble. This answer is big trouble. Big, big, huge, big trouble. That's how close you are to the edge. That's how close you always are to God. And you know it. You just don't want to admit it. Pushing you into the castle is finally admitting it. So in your first mansion, what happens is you have to own it. That's the difficulty in the first mansion. You finally plug in. And you finally get to a place where you have to admit, I hear you. I may not like what I hear, but I hear you. And you own it. And through the work that you do in your first mansion, you have to admit that even in the chaos in your life, that chaos is created even by distraction, and even in the distraction, it is God. So even when someone, for example, even when you don't want to hear some truth, you have to own that even that truth is a form of guidance that you don't want to hear. And that you do hear it, but even if you want to distract it. And that you get to the point where you recognize, all right, I know my wiring works. I may not want it to work, but I finally have to admit I know it works. You get to that point. Once that's in place, you go and you begin to sense the second mansion. And the second mansion's a bit more refined. And in the second mansion, you start seeking out soul companions. You begin to look for that, because what you recognize is this interior life is a very deep and magnificent place. Now, unlike what a lot of people fear, your outside world is not going to disintegrate and go evaporated, and there goes my bank account. I remember one woman, she wasn't really a woman. She was old enough to be one, but she wasn't one. You know what I'm saying by that? I mean, sometimes, you have puerpetuernesses, and you have eternal girls, too, where they just don't mature like women. They just look like big girls all their lives. And she said, I was talking about kind of growing up and things like that, and the way we are in the crazy spiritual world, the way we think. And she says, God can't take my money. My father put it in a trust fund. I like that answer. I don't know where she is now, but there it is. I always love it when someone tests the waters, yeah? I don't know. The third mansion is, as we will go in, as we'll discuss, the defeat of reason. The defeat of reason. This is where we all struggle. And we struggle, and we struggle, and we struggle, and we struggle. Now, Teresa, this is what we will do. The way we think is that, well, as soon as I finish the first mansion, then I'm going to get to the second, then I'm going to... But she says, it doesn't work like that. She says you have to become familiar with the mansions, and then you'll see that sometimes you're in the second, and sometimes you're in the third, and sometimes... Why? Because life is a journey in which we find ourselves struggling with different issues sometimes, and then She says, one day you can be just anywhere at any time. You can be, as she would say, in your kitchen peeling potatoes, and suddenly you're taken up in a mystical experience. Or suddenly you are filled with such a sense of who you are at a most intense interior way. You have become accustomed to measuring your self-worth by what you do, by your productivity, by whether you're producing something and whether what you produce is impressing others, or whether you've gotten over impressing others as a way of impressing others. In any case, and in either case, production is the measure of the Western experience of God. And thus, whether or not there is any authenticity to your relationship with God is measured by productivity and financial rewards, some kind of benefits on the outside. The measure of the divine as an interior experience and the way it makes you deepen your experience of being alive is a whole different scale. And that being alive and being secure within that being alive and how that plants you in life is not something we've been taught to appreciate. We don't even know what to do with that. You see, what do we do with that? Okay, so now I'm more alive. What do I do with that? Do I take that, do I put that on my resume? But I'm more alive. Can they hire me because I'm more alive? You see, we are so production-oriented that unless we produce a reasonable consequence to each one of our experiences, we don't even know how to value our experiences. And thus they leave us very often chasing our tail. We have no idea how even to manage the experiences or recognize the experiences we often need to have, or how to even pause for the types of experiences we should have in terms of our inner life. I'm absolutely convinced that one of the reasons we're so drugged, we are so drugged, is because we have no idea that we need to have the type of life that the castle is referring to. A life of reflection, a life of interior silence, a life of contemplation, in which you take the experiences of your day and you reflect upon them. And you reflect upon how the words you've said affected the field of your life. How the decisions you've made or have to make are going to impact your life and the lives of others. How the things people have said to you or you have said to them are filled with either positive or negative energy. Are there things you need to pray about before you make a decision? Do you feel yourself losing your soul in the midst of a decision? Are you negotiating your self-worth as you make a choice? When someone says, "How do you feel about this?" do you in that instant lie to them and say, "Oh, I'm okay," when in fact you're not? But you don't even have the stamina in that moment to tell the truth. And in that same voice, you would ask for your highest potential. When you cannot stand up to someone asking you, "Where would you like to go to dinner?" Does it matter if we eat this kind of food or that? And you can't even say yes to that question about food. You can't even be honest about that. But you would ask God for your highest potential. Now, these are questions and parts of your life that you could dismiss and say, no, you don't dismiss them. This is what you take into your first mansion, and you reflect deeply upon this. Because what you are reflecting upon is, in your first mansion, is you enter a room and you sit still in yourself and you say, I can't even tell the truth. I cannot answer a simple question. I can't do it. And I will tell myself, I don't want to cause any trouble. I just don't want to be a troublemaker. I'll do anything to avoid... No, excuse me. I said, did you answer it yes or no? Did you lie? It's a simple answer here. Are you lying to me again? I said, did you lie? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes, you did. So the bottom line is, in the simplest question about a restaurant, the answer is yes, you lied. It did matter to you, but you couldn't do it. In the simplest matter here, did you tell the truth? No, you negotiated your soul. We're talking noodles. Now, I don't care what excuse you give me. What's worse is yourself. You don't give me any excuse, but you do have to talk to yourself now in your soul, deep in your soul. Now we're talking. It's you and your soul. You got to go deep. I don't care what you say to me. If it's me, I'm not in it. I'm just going to stir your pot deep and hearty. But you're going to go and you have to say, what kind of excuses do I give myself? I'll tell myself, I just don't want to be conflictual. I just don't want to upset people. Oh, stop it. The truth is you don't have the backbone. You can't even handle a yes or a no when it comes to noodles, rice, and Italian food. That's what you say inside of yourself. And then you take a look in that room and you say, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough. It's going to be tough work. This is going to be hard. You better believe it is. But if you look through a window in your soul, you'll see everybody's in the same room. Because it is very, very difficult to even deal with truth. Truth is the most difficult force in your interior. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. To know thyself. To know thyself. And when you start with something that very little, and you just realize, I can't even go there. So then you start realizing, what do I say all day long that's a negotiation of the truth? What do I say all day long? I mean all day long. How difficult is it? What do I say all day long that is simply not true? And you got to go in that room at the end of the day and reflect on it and think, what kind of day have I had? That's why we reflect on it. That's why. That's why we have to go inside. It's quite something when you think about it, isn't it? This is where Buddha would say, see why it's all illusion? Because we all make up the way we want to see things at the end of the day. It's like, what store did you live today? It's quite something where we live. But then she says, after all of that, when God comes for you, she describes her fourth mansion. She says, now God comes for you, and it is exquisite. She said, it is just exquisite. She used to have experiences of levitation when she would be like receiving Holy Communion or something. She'd have to hold on to the. She had a chapel next to the cathedral, and all right, you're too big to murder, so I'll leave you alone. She would hold on to the bar, and the priest would give communion, and she would actually go into a state of ecstasy. And she would start levitating, and she'd have to hold on. But let me explain how that happens in sort of a mystical way. And that's this is healing and this is mysticism simultaneously. When I do a reading on you, what I'm looking at is how you have distributed your life force through the years of your life. Okay? I'm looking for your fragments through the years of your life. So if I said to all of you, where are you other than here? Can you imagine answering that question? Have you any idea how many places you are other than here? You are so many places other than here. So very many. But this is kind of a far away, so I'm not going to use it much tonight. But you know, my icon is this little guy, and I draw him this way, right? You all can see him just for this evening sufficiently, right? But I started drawing it, I started drawing it this way because what it represents is that this is your energy field, and this is energy coming in through the top of your head. And like your soul. And what happens is with every choice, see there you are, your mouth? With every choice you make, your energy leaves you, your soul leaves you, and it goes into a process of creation. It goes into a process of cause and effect. It does do that. Okay? Which is why prayer and guidance is so vital. Prayer and guidance and grace. And in my humble opinion, without prayer, you're dealing with psychic free radicals. With prayer, you're dealing with grace. That same life force becomes graced. Okay, so I find where you are. And for every place that you're anchored, you are anchoring you are dealing with the tiny little subtle equation of time and space. So that the more you are anchored in your history, the more weight, W-A-I-G-H-T, psychic weight you have. And the more psychic weight you have, the more you have to W-I-A-T for anything, including healing. So that a mystic or a master is someone who doesn't have any history. Everything's in present time, so thought goes into form instantaneously. There is no excess wiring. Like a Jesus or an avatar. There is no history. Jesus did not have a history, psychically speaking. Are you with me? All right. You have someone, when you see these healers, or when I see someone who has the potential to heal, when I look at people who have illness, am I dealing with anyone in this room who has an illness? Do I have anybody in this room? Okay. Okay. So is there anyone in this room who has any kind of an emotional or psychological or any kind of other stresses that would require any kind of healing? So who has any kind of healing agenda that would participate in and benefit from any kind of healing grace this weekend? Okay. All right. Who has no use for any healing? Who is open to healing grace then this weekend? Thank you. Takes a while to get you out of the closet. Okay. All right, let me say that what I have come to learn from my work is that the more a person is anchored in their history, the more they're anchored in time. The more that they are anchored in that, the more they have to wait, W-A-I-T, for any kind of change anywhere. So, the idea that something quite serious can be healed instantaneously, to me, is absolutely a given. The block is the individual. And the block is the speed at which the individual can handle. Sometimes it's the speed at which sometimes individuals can't handle the speed of an experience. They just can't handle it. They absolutely psychically cannot handle something that someone will, I've seen it happen so many times. They'll have a hunch, someone will say, I wonder what's wrong with, and you get a hunch and you'll say, I'll tell you what's wrong, your son's on drugs. No, I don't want to hear that. Do you understand me? I don't want to hear that. I know he's just having trouble at school and that's what it really is. Fine. If that's what you want to think that is, you go right ahead. And they have to believe something that it's not for 2 years. And the rest of the world falls apart until that person can handle believing, finding out that in fact the child was on drugs the whole time. But they had to get the news in 2 years, when in fact it was available in 2 seconds. But they couldn't take it at the speed of light. So they had to take it at the speed of Earth. Okay? Now, your top mansions are the speed of light. Your lower mansions are the speed of Earth. All right? So you're going to be working with God as Earth in the lower mansions and God as light in the above. And that is one way to put it. And when you work in the lower mansions, you work with why you fear God as light. And the speed at which you want to keep God away from you. Or God as truth away from you. So that when you would close your eyes and have a question of, what should I do with my life? How many of you have ever asked that question? How many of you are asking that question now? All right, now, listen to me. Here's number 3. How fast do you want that answered? No. Listen to me very clearly. How fast do you want that question answered? Do you want it revealed slowly, medium rare, instant? How deeply, how rapidly, how fast? I want you to reflect on that very carefully. Because up until now, you've never reflected on how fast or in which way you want that answered. You've just asked it as a stuff question. I want stuff. Now I want more stuff. What kind of stuff can I have and which way should that stuff come? More stuff, my stuff, which stuff? But you never really thought, what if it's not stuff? What if the answer to that question is really not stuff? What if the answer to that question is transformation? What if the answer to that question is some revelation of truth? How did I expect the answer to that question to come, and how fast do I want that truth? Do I want that truth to come into 6 months, or do I want it in 6 minutes? Do I really want to know the answer to that question like this or like that? I want you to think about that, because that's going to come. But it'll come that fast. So before tomorrow, you answer that. How fast would you want that question answered? How deep, how fast, how much? Own it. Now, a lot of you It's late. I know you're tired, so take a deep breath. Can we get some air in here? You want to open a door? I know it's late. You've been driving. Continuing the mansions. The fourth has to do with the awakening of, it's not just love, it's a much richer experience of the sacred love. And then I'll go on to describe it when we get there. But the upper mansions are a mystical track into the soul. Remember that Teresa was a mystical theologian. And so she wrote about a mystical union with God. Now, Jim Finley is here, and tomorrow afternoon, when we get back from lunch, he's going to discuss John of the Cross, who was Teresa's spiritual director once she was spiritual companion, I suppose you'd call it. Spiritual director, would that be the right?
Let's say spiritual companion.
Spiritual companion. Right. They were each other's in a sense. Mystical friends. Yeah, that's good. She was 52, he was 25. And Jim is going to share a little bit about John of the Cross and a sample of that and their extraordinary bond, which will bring you even more deeply into the consciousness of the rich texture of the soul. It'll be absolutely outstanding. By that time, you will have been in at least one of the mansions. So I'll have you breathless. Now, I don't like to open a mansion at this hour and then send you to bed. I cannot do that. But what I wanted to do perhaps is just say that, the world is a changing place. It doesn't take like a bright shining star to say that. But one of the ways the world is changing is not unlike the earmark of the mystical experience, in that what has characterized the West is our absolute adoration of reason. We love reason. We love everything to be reasonable. That comes from our tradition of Descartes and Rousseau and John Locke and Copernicus and Galileo. We think everything can be reasonable, or we can find a reason for everything. When we can't find reasons, when things become so unreasonable, well, first of all, as a result of loving reason, everything that can't reason has no place, which is why we think we can do whatever we want to nature, because it can't reason. And to animals, it can't reason. So what can't reason, we can do whatever we want to. And because of that arrogance that goes with reason, we think we can reason our way out of anything. The problem is that the world has created systems that are bigger than our capacity to reason our way out of. Okay? And it's not the result of one country, it's the result of all countries trying to do things, be places. It's the result of the way human beings are. And when things become so unreasonable, in the history, people have tended to pull out the Armageddon theology. Well, it must be the end of time, because I can't see any reason how we ever going to get through this. That's one way we've dealt with it. But another way is that I think that history always plays an ace up its sleeve. I mean, one of the reasons I love history so much is because in studying history, you're studying how humanity has always tried to one-up the hand of God, itself and the hand of God. I study war. That's my hobby. I study wars. I've been addicted to the study of war since I was 13. I got to change my hobbies, but it's a little old. But I love to study war. And so I've studied, like the bank of studies from World War II and the American Civil War and the Russian Revolution, and that goes on and on and on. And I'm into World War I now, the long neglected war that I couldn't get interested in, and now I can't stop studying it. And the thing about war and where we are now is that I look at the study of the genius of the divine. It's almost like the study of good and evil, good and evil, good and evil, good and evil, at balance with each other. And at the end of the day, I wonder, yes? I wonder again and again how in this time that we are in this period of evolution that I absolutely believe a divine force is behind. Because the way I would put it is that I think there's a collision of the God mythologies happening. I really would believe that. I think there is a collision of a structure when we talked about the new age happening and a new time of whatever we call it. I think that's real. But I think that as humanity kind of came together, and we started with this kind of revolution of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and all of that, I think somehow that revolution got stuck in the 80s. And it got stuck in an era of, it just never pursued beyond the 80s. It went from revolution to involution to narcissism, and it's never gotten beyond. It's never gotten beyond. It should have gotten to evolution and then revelation, but it got stuck in narcissism. And I think that somehow or other, the way the heaven balances is that when a darkness comes, the other side of it is that there's a mystical archetype being born in people where it never used to exist, which is like the mass of us, a feeling of mysticism out of monasteries, where people who would not have normally been called years ago to have a passion for grace, to channel grace, to be healers. Look at your parents, my parents. They would never have thought to do that. But now the need to be significant as mystics out of monasteries, to find a way of an inner life as rich as your exterior life has become the most significant thing to you. And I don't think that you can, for one moment, dismiss that as your imaginings, or that you have in any way don't have a life with a calling, but that your calling is so significant that you can't afford not to respond. The people who have said to me, I feel so confused about my life, have no idea how unconfused they really are. It's just that people are used to looking for huge answers to their confusion, when in fact God is a subtle force, a sublime force, a delicate force. Grace is not a great big huge dramatic force, but a delicate one. It's just that we're taught to look for huge bubbles and bangles and sparkles. But in fact, it's a subtle, exquisite light. Are you with me? And if you really could appreciate that, you'd realize you're not lost at all. You haven't been lost for a very long time. And you'll never be lost again. And part two is that the idea that you have to go someplace else or move away or start a business or leave the people that had promised to meet you here on this earth before you were born, the people who said, I'll go down ahead of you and I'll meet you there. And I'll be your witness that you were here on this earth. And you'll be my witness. And then I'll meet you back here one day and I will wait for you. Or you will wait for me. You don't want to leave anybody. You don't want to leave those people who are walking this life with you. And you don't want to look at them and make them feel inadequate because you're not happy. Because it's not their fault or this myth that you were meant to do something great, big, huge, when in fact that great, big, hugeness is in you instead of around you. You see what I'm saying?